Perfect. Great. So I am incredibly pumped for today's conversation with four amazing advocates and unstoppable entrepreneurs who essentially continually break down barriers on a regular basis. I want to introduce myself. My name is Somin Rajasekharan, creator of Buildupwomen series. Before we begin this very impactful conversation, I do want to acknowledge that I am joining everyone from the Ottawa, which is an unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I certainly do acknowledge Canada's First Nations, Inuit, Métis people, and the tremendous contributions throughout our country as well. So, well, the economy is continuing to reopen, which is pretty awesome. And at the same time, there has been an urgent need and call for better support for women entrepreneurs. It's something that existed pre-COVID. However, like all of us know, with the pandemic, it had unveiled a lot and exposed a lot in terms of the lack of support that is being or has been provided since or prior to the pandemic as well. Various kinds of supports have been provided during the pandemic, but I guess the question always stands is, or still stands, is was that support needed, or what was this, or even the supports that were provided, which ones should have been implemented even prior to the pandemic? And are the supports long-term, short-term? Who does it impact? How? And I guess the most important question is, what should supports look like post-pandemic? And I say this simply because there has been a lot of focus on supports and various programs and initiatives during the pandemic. Not so much about what happens post-COVID-19. What should stay? What should go? Who was part of this conversation on what should stay, what should go? How are these being implemented? So I'm really, really excited that I am joined by Ashley Lamotte, who is the CCO of Creative Quay and also an activator at SheEO and Indigenous creative speaker. Hilary Scanlon, who's the founder and CEO of Still Solutions. Sharon Nyongweso, who's the CEO and founder of Quake Lab, as well as Jamila Franco, who's the co-founder of Afro Hub Market and co-founder of Nyanko Design Labs as well. So where to begin? I want to essentially take you all back to well over a year ago, so 2020. Everything, business is running as usual. You have a structure in place, you have your vision and mission and what that goal for 2020 or even the next 2 years, 2 to 3 years is going to look like, what your mission is going to be. And then of course, hit by the pandemic very suddenly. So I want to kind of take you back in terms of, well, keeping in mind that you all came from different experiences. You have different whys in terms of why you started your journey in the entrepreneurship space, and most importantly, why you started your own venture. Why is that happening? So looking back at 2020, and I guess pre and post COVID in 2020, what were some of the barriers that you had faced when in the back of your mind, your main focus was to ensure that there was growth within the venture that you began? And I guess compared to now, post-pandemic, well, heading towards post-pandemic, hopefully, fingers crossed, what have your experiences been like? So Hilary, if you can kickstart this for us.
Sure. So thank you so much, everyone who's going to be tuning into this, and my pleasure to be speaking with these three incredible women today, and with our wonderful moderator. So some of the barriers that I particularly experienced with regards to COVID, so I'll give you a bit of background. So I am the founder and CEO of Still Solutions, and we work to bridge the gap between sustainability and accessibility by making disposal accessible to people with disabilities. We incorporated in 2017, and since then we've been really hard to do like just R&D, and to identify our target market. We even secured a number of clients within our target market, for instance, who committed to purchasing our core product, which is called Waste Finder, when we were set up to launch sales in March 2020. However, the market that we identified, in this case, it was universities, were not open to the public once the pandemic struck. So we really had to modify our entire strategy of how we were going to launch our company and our sales, which were again scheduled to start in March 2020. So to adapt to the situation, we did a couple of things. We shifted our target market to spaces that had to remain open during COVID. So for instance, municipalities, pharmacies, some cafes were also in that mix when they were allowed to be open. And we also shifted and modified what we were offering to our clients. So waste disposal kind of went to the back of everyone's mind during the pandemic. And what was really at the top of everyone's mind was healthcare and safety. Some things that businesses did at the time to help their customers adjust to social distancing was implement stickers on the ground to help people with social distancing. However, those are not accessible to people with vision loss. We can't feel them under our feet, and we can't, of course, see them. So that has resulted in numerous cases of me and other people running into others, getting harassed. There's been cases of people whose guide dogs, for instance, have been kicked or abused in some way because of people's inability to social distance based on the structure of the environment. So in order to address that, we actually expanded the use of our products and started offering accessible social distancing indicators. And those were actually the majority of our sales for 2020. So that was something else that we did. And I'll just quickly mention that even though we developed in 2017, we were basically still considered a startup because we hadn't launched our sales until 2020. So we were not eligible for basically any of the government funding at the federal level because you needed, for instance, to have sales or revenue or just kind of general operations in the previous year. And we just didn't have that.
Thank you, Hillary. And you said some pretty amazing points. Well, one is the inaccessible design during the pandemic, and that still continues. And that happened even post-pandemic, is not having accessible design. And the second is what became very, very clear are in terms of access to funding. There's several businesses or startups that unfortunately didn't make it to that bracket to even access funds, and unfortunately had to close, and that was their main source of income. So thank you for bringing that up. Sharon?
Thank you, and I'm really happy to be here. And I'll just go ahead and pick up right where Hillary left off. One of the things I just kind of wanted to highlight at a broad level is the fact that a lot of the challenges that were trying to be solved for during the pandemic, some successfully, some not so successfully by government, by institutions, are actually not unique to the pandemic. They had existed pre-pandemic, and I think part of the reason why they became so outright and front and center was because they were now a problem for those who were not marginalized pre-pandemic. And I think that's where we saw the rise in supports. But because we were talking about, like, I hate to use this term, but poisoned fruit from a poisoned tree, it means that the way that those supports were built didn't really respond to pre-pandemic challenges, but to current challenges faced by those who this was new. So I'll give you an example, and it's really interesting to hear Hillary say that you technically came into the market in 2020, because that was really, really similar to me. I've been working on my own, doing the work that I do for a number of years, but I actually only incorporated at the end of 2019. Had a lot of plans, set up a big old strategy for this company that was meant to launch, and then hit by pandemic. So once again, similar to Hillary, I didn't have access to any of those supports. And that being said, I do have a lot of privilege in that the work that we do is fully remote. We don't have any physical products, so that means that we didn't have anything sitting in back stock because we couldn't open a storefront or anything of the sort. We basically just our businesses in like my brain more or less. So there was some flexibility there, but at the same time, like again, dealing with the same challenges we are carrying from pre-pandemic. There was a report that came out from the city of Toronto a while ago that showed that I think Black entrepreneurs had the hardest time accessing funding across the board. I think it was specifically Black women entrepreneurs and Indigenous women entrepreneurs were the least likely to receive any kind of funding, be it grant, loan, anything of that nature. And so it was really interesting, for instance, when the government came out with funding for Black entrepreneurs, but it was A, loan, and B, based on very little data, because again, Canada is a place where we historically have not collected disaggregated data. So they were trying to sort of throw this in quotes pandemic money at a pandemic problem when we're actually dealing with a pre-pandemic societal challenges that need much more long-standing solutions. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
that was
all
an
I got.
excellent. No, that was an absolutely excellent point. And I think that that's part of what the concern is that the pandemic being used as an excuse for several things that were implemented, which should have been implemented pre-pandemic, and there hasn't
Absolutely.
been accountability by any means. But now with all of the I'll use air quotation supports that are being provided during the pandemic is becoming recognized as a, oh my goodness, this is amazing, rather than a, oh my goodness, why hasn't this been done a long time ago? What is the reason? And there's no accountability for it. So that was
And who is still missing out, even now
who's
with
still missing
pandemic?
out.
Who's still not being
Yeah,
reached?
absolutely. And even with regards to the point that you made about data collection, the way that that's being distributed and who has access to even participate in the way that the data is being collected. So there's still a really, really long way to go, but it's certainly being the voices that are kind of coming out and saying this, those are being amplified, and I can hear them louder and louder, which is pretty awesome. So thank you for bringing that up, Sharon. Ashley?
Yeah, just to move with that, I mean, I feel like COVID was the master amplifier. It was the big thing that just amplified all of the existing issues. I mean, for many Indigenous women, I mean, I'm an Indigenous women entrepreneur based in Southern Ontario. And, I was doing in person. And when COVID hit, I was slated to have my first real productive year, and COVID happened. Every single contract went down the drain. So it was, okay, how do we pivot to digital, and how do we pivot quickly? Because as a small business, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, small businesses can't compete with these big corporations and big companies that are like, oh, here, pay for this, pay for this, pay for this. We're small, we can't compete with the big ones, and nor should we. We are a completely separate industry as small business owners. And I feel like Indigenous women entrepreneurs, we were already at a disadvantage. Starting point of non-Indigenous women entrepreneurs and women, there's a huge gap in the supports and services that we're able to access, financially, even services and infrastructure. It's just not there. We are already behind when we start. So as even for myself, I could not access any of the COVID supports because I was either, I made too much, or I didn't make enough because I was still considered a startup. Creative Quay began in 2017, but we didn't start actually making solid income until 2019, 2020. So it was one of those where it was like my first 3 months was beautiful, and then the COVID happened, but it was like, oh, but you have made money, so you can't access this. And it was one of those, it was a literally, I don't know how many Indigenous women I talked to who run sole proprietors were faced with closing because you can't compete when you're already starting behind.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Ashley. Part of it has always been that that concern with the lack of supports that are being offered, or even a lack of accessibility to supports and resources. And even going back to funding, how is that funding being read? Because success means different things for different businesses. It's always, unfortunately, comes back to the tangible, which is the amount, rather than the social impact that is being done by organizations. So absolutely, in that sense, that has been and still and was continues to be a huge concern. And I say this because of when you and I connected, and you were so vulnerable to kind of share your story and your experiences, which was, well, thank you so much for that. And then kind of speaking to kind of being able to grasp and gain support from other through Indigenous funding, which before, you're very honest in saying that I didn't really know what the pathway was, or what existed and what didn't, or who to go to. And it still stands as a really, really big concern for even women who are going into the entrepreneurship space because of the layoffs that have happened during the pandemic. So yeah, so thank you. I believe Yamila is just going through some concerns, but she will join us shortly. But so we've kind of talked about the barriers and how all of you have overcome and are still overcoming them and working them through and identifying the gaps, and also in the meantime supporting others in your community as well. And within that, the term support clearly means has a different meaning for everyone. And unfortunately, it always kind of comes back to having one solution for every problem, which is a huge concern. It has been a concern before, and it still is. So reflecting on essentially the supports that were or weren't provided, it can be during pandemic, pre-pandemic. What are kind of your thoughts on what was provided or not provided? What does it mean to each of you as an entrepreneur who represent the BIPOC community and also the disability community? What should that support have looked like? What should it look like now? I mean, what are kind of the challenges right now? So that was a big question, but I just wanted to kind of throw that and present that to you. So perhaps we can start with Ashley, since we ended with Ashley in this one.
Yeah. So, I mean, as an Indigenous woman, support means very different than what is typically thought of. So we moved, I'm going to use I statements, but many Indigenous women entrepreneurs that I know are very similar. I moved towards economic reconciliation and self-sustainability. You know, we are all about reciprocity. I'm all about, you know, giving back and supporting others. It's not about making millions of dollars and being like a multimillionaire. It's about taking care of our community and being a part of the community. So whether that's, you know, the business community locally or even nationally. And the support that I received through COVID had nothing to do with monetary. It was all in support, as in peer support, working with, we went, Creative Quay went in a completely new direction when we pivoted to digital. And I started looking for networking support. You know, who are the other Indigenous women? And it wasn't really amplified that that support existed. It was, we had to go and find it and or create it ourselves. And that's exactly what happened through the Indigenous Lift Collective, in which it was a group of Indigenous women entrepreneurs who saw a need and filled that gap. And that circle of sisterhood literally saved me through the pandemic and saved my sanity and let, you know, that camaraderie and sisterhood. That is what is most needed, I find, through, you know, when you're dealing with such traumatizing issues and then amplified by our already existing trauma. It's, you need someone to communicate with and who can listen and really kind of feel what you're feeling and understand what you're going through and empathize. I feel that is the biggest support through such something like the global pandemic. And that is what I focus on when I think of support, and how I support others now is that reciprocity, giving back, social enterprise. That's where the future is moving forward as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely spectacular. I mean, that's even for me reflecting on how Build Up Women series got started. I was laid off, and I was the breadwinner at that time, and I was a lot of question marks. I didn't know the how to be a parent during a pandemic while being a mom who was trying to figure out what the next steps were going to be in a world where no one was hiring. So, and that's how I found a lot of comfort through meeting extraordinary women like yourselves, and just picking each other up and just energizing each other and instilling that self-confidence when you yourself have that doubt of how am I going to make it to tomorrow, mentally, and what could that I don't and that the whole spectrum of unknowns that you're being faced with, and all happened and had happened before, but it just amplified a lot more. So I definitely am very, very thankful to have had, essentially created my own tribe of amazing women to connect with and vent to, and just be a part of each other's journeys and while picking each other up. So that was great. Thank you, Ashley. Sharon.
Okay, I'm very impressed with myself that I haven't forgotten to mute and unmute when I speak, so just gonna pat myself on the back for that. Um, I resonate so much with what you said, Ashley, and that like a lot of the support, you found yourself smack down in the middle of both receiving and giving wasn't monetary in terms of entrepreneur to entrepreneur, because I think that's what that looked like for me as well. Stepping into a very new phase of my entrepreneurship journey in right around the pandemic, going from being a sole proprietor to being incorporated as the pandemic hit, and then having to navigate what that means at a legal level, at a CRA level, at a just, the way you present the work you do and the way you talk about the work you do on that level. And a lot of what I received from others in the way of support was just, that little nudge to say, this is who you should talk to. Here's a referral to this accountant, or, here's someone who, when I started, because again, 2020, I've been working on my own. And right now we just updated the website and we have about 11 people working with us. And so even just being able to say, like, here's someone who you should definitely talk to if you need some like extra hands. And so that's the support I think I have received, is that just community of I love how Mariam Kaba, she's an abolitionist, and she describes hope as a practice. And so it's not like a thing you feel or thing you do, but it's a practice that is really consistent. And I think that's what that has looked like for me. It's hope as a practice, and with that level of reciprocity. So that is all of the championing, and even just people who spoke my name in rooms when I that I wasn't in has been so incredible. And especially because I think I carry a lot of discomfort with the way in which that rise or that increase in business came, because in the last year and a half we haven't just been carrying a pandemic, we've also witnessed this global moment where, for some of us, what we have talked about, what we have discussed in rooms with people who look like us, with who share the same understanding of the world, now more people are starting to come into a similar language and a similar way of seeing the world. And we also experienced that. And that is also the space in which my business got a lot of traction. And that is a very difficult thing to sit with. It's like, did my business emerge from trauma? And part of the support I have gotten are people reminding me, you were doing this before 2020, so you are not capitalizing on trauma. It just, you just happen to be doing what you're doing in a moment where it's most relevant. And so that's the kind of support that I received. In terms of, again, I really love actually what you said, especially around reciprocity. I think the ways in which me as an individual and as a business, have worked to also take up space in the way of providing support has been something that has always been core to how I understand business. I did not set out to be an entrepreneur. In fact, I despised entrepreneur because of my experience as a child with entrepreneurship as being, this is what poor people do. Like they're entrepreneurs. And I was tired of being poor, so I did not feel like doing this. But here we are today. But I always have thought of entrepreneurship as, if I am forced to live in a capitalist, a colonial, an imperial society in which I have to make money to survive, literally, the thing I can do is find ways to subvert the system that I am forced to live in. And so, what that's looked like for me as an individual and as a business, for instance, is we made a commitment really early on, like when I had one contract, to give 5% of our revenue to land and water defenders and to mutual aid funds specifically. So this is not to charity, like registered nonprofits, right? And I have nothing against those, but to the folks who can't give you a receipt, right? To the folks who are calling out for community support. And that, to me, that is a way to just completely, flip that on its head. And that my accountant hates it, but here we are. And, even just, for instance, in the space that I work in, which I think if you were to really narrow me down was the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, it's a very unregulated space. And I don't necessarily think regulation is good or bad, but it's a very unregulated space, which unfortunately means in the last 10 years, right in the beginning, when this industry began, it was mostly filled by predominantly white women. And then we're seeing a wave where particularly women of color are taking up a lot of space in this industry. And the challenge is, because it's unregulated, people in the past never talked about method. They never talked about even simple things like how much they charged. And so folks who are in this space are sort of, flying without any kind of rhyme or reason or knowledge. And so that reciprocity also means being very, very explicit and very honest about how we do what we do and how we charge for it and what our methodology is. And learning from folks like Larissa Crawford of Future Ancestors and others who are showing that. I think that is support for other entrepreneurs in the way that you're giving and receiving. And so I think that's what support has looked like. But funny enough, I think a lot of that, maybe just to echo what I had said previously, probably would have happened with or without a pandemic. I think it's just the nature of when you are a person who is from a marginalized group or has experienced marginalization, sometimes you're going to come at a space differently because you're going to understand what it means to have to go through barriers to access and participation. Sometimes you won't. I mean, everyone knows the phrase, not all skin folk are kinfolk, but I think often what I've seen is that you do come to it with a different energy. And so I think that would have happened, pandemic or no pandemic.
Yeah, that was amazing. So many things to kind of extract from what you said, and so many things that I even myself resonated. Even reflecting back for myself, and I think I spoke to this when I was chatting with each and every one of you, is essentially not feeling represented or belonged. We immigrated to a very small village called Chur, Nova Scotia, and we were one of probably 3 families who are from India, and not feeling represented or belonged, and being looked at as though I didn't belong or didn't have. So faced with a lot of microaggression, and I, with the series, kind of reflecting back, it was a very intentional decision, because I've always heard excuses of, oh well, we can't really find people for panels when we're talking about inclusion. And like, I'm gonna prove you wrong, because there's nothing, this isn't something that, should be something that's an accountability thing, an intentional accountability thing that should be brought out of every single conversation, where everyone is included in conversations that matter, and ensuring that there are no excuses, essentially. So many things, yeah, resonated from what you mentioned, Sharon. So thank you for sharing your thoughts. So Jamila, I know that you just joined us, so perhaps I would love if you're able to unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you see me? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. I was actually going to say thank you so much for letting me join and share. When could you repeat again and which question are we at? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, in our previous question, just kind of speaking to some of the barriers that were faced as women who are from underrepresented communities, marginalized communities. And now what I was alluding to was support that's being done seems to be kind of a one solution fits all type of support that's being presented, and that's not the case. Support means different things to several people, and so right now it's just kind of reflecting on the supports that were provided to entrepreneurs from the BIPOC community, from disability community, looking at from what was provided. What are essentially your thoughts on that? And looking into kind of the own supports that were provided to you and what you provided within your community, and going into what it actually should look like and what should stay and what should have happened a while ago.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I want to share about that is the normalization, and I do see it after COVID as well, is how much more normalized these conversations have become, and that's a big one that I feel beforehand. Even me coming as a newcomer, I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, where conversations about disability, equity, diversity, inclusion, they're not necessarily the norm, but we're also not faced with such a hit in our faces that maybe we are different when we're reminded of it so much, maybe from not being from the dominant culture in one way or another. So when I think about the support systems, I look back at my university experience and after graduating as well. So I actually, most of my life here in what we know today as Canada has been in Victoria and British Columbia, which is a very small town. It's very, I think the mindset is very progressive on that end. However, I feel that a lot of it, and this is where I've experienced, again, my own experiences, a lot of things are performative. And that is actually, even when organizations will come forward and say that they want to bring a change or that they want to support or asking, what do you need? A lot of it was performative, because the moment you will share something that you needed, but that will take people out of their ways, or maybe disagree with their worldviews or their way of doing work, then it would be sometimes ignored or sometimes agreed upon in meetings, in bigger gatherings. But when it came to actually doing the work in the back, that was not really present, or that was not something that would stick. So it's kind of like when you say, yes, we'll do training for the whole team on Jedi, but afterwards there's no conversation of even how that training will be implemented in the workplace. And that's actually one of those things that I feel needs to come up out of this pandemic, out of what we see as supports right now. And I don't know if I would even call it a support, but I believe it should be the norm that people would have that type of cultural awareness and cultural knowledge as well, considering that Canada is not a homogeneous country, especially knowing that to start with, we had Indigenous communities here. So yes, it is my expectation for people to understand the history of the lands they're on and the diversity just within these communities that have been here since time immemorial. But afterwards, you have a whole community, because Canada is built on newcomers, on immigrants, really, even people that believe that this is their land and that they're here. So it's that, I think, that transitioning from moving towards that maybe sense of entitlement towards more gratitude, but also towards how can we work together to continue moving forward. So hope that makes sense on that end. I really wanted to bring up the performative piece here, where we're doing the work, we're doing this conversation, and I know that people will listen, and organizations might be interested in businesses, etc. But again, it's what they do with it more than even them being interested itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point, because this kind of goes back to a conversation that I had not long ago about words and then versus action and then accountability. So even looking at organizations who make a bold statement about inclusion and equity and diversity, what does that even mean? How are you implementing this, right? And what does your organizational structure look like? What does the workplace culture look like? Who's going in and auditing this, right? So it's those performative kind of talks, as you pointed out, which I felt really went up since the pandemic. And some are, intentional changes, and some I've seen as performative changes to get word out there saying XYZ organization is is supporting or is doing this to increase inclusion or equity and so on. But definitely kind of comes back to that how, what is that accountability, and why wasn't this also done way before, right? It's that whole hiding behind the pandemic that, you know, everyone is doing it, so we should also do it, but not even for the right intentions or the intentionality behind it. So yeah, thanks so much, Jamila. Hillary.
So first, I just wanted to say that everything that everyone has said was absolutely amazing. So I don't even want to talk on the same points that you mentioned. I had some of those points written down, but you just spoke about it so eloquently, all of you. And I want to make sure that the spaces, or the people that should be talking about these, are the ones that are taking up spaces in conversations. So I just wanted to quickly mention a few points just from my perspective as someone who is blind, someone with a disability. So what I've just kind of noticed with regards to the funding supports that are available is that it doesn't at all focus on the problem. And I know that we've kind of somewhat touched on that, but I feel like that's an issue with the design of the system, definitely. It focuses much more on the solution rather than focusing on what the problem is and how to then create supports that reflect that. Another major issue is the fact that in order to understand the problem, you need to engage with people that are experiencing the problem, that are experiencing the impacts of that system that you've created. And so often solutions or funding programs are put out into the community without that consultation or co-creative process occurring. And then I also just wanted to mention that I totally understand that funding and supports come in various forms, but the success of entrepreneurs and businesses under the current system measures success via profit, and it's really hard to secure profits without funding. So even though Soul Solutions is a social enterprise, we definitely prioritize a quadruple bottom line of people, planet, profit, and purpose. We can't do all of that unless we have profit. So today, for example, I had one of my employees compare pricing on a product that was very sustainable and about like 600 times the amount of something that was from more of a mainstream kind of company that was able to provide a solution that we needed, but we can't maintain that kind of planet aspect that we're trying to, while also trying to balance our profit. And we can't get to that point where we're purchasing anything that is sustainable or engaging with communities that that we're meant to serve and that we're designed to serve without that profit in place. So unless we change the system and the priorities of that system, which is again profit, cash is going to be one of the best tools to ensure equity, at least to some extent, amongst entrepreneurs. But I'm also all for just overthrowing the system or restructuring the system. I think that that's a big piece too, but I also recognize that engaging and trying to fight the system is absolutely exhausting, especially if you're from a marginalized community. Even applying to funding and supports is absolutely exhausting because of the resources and time that it takes, especially if you have other things going on, like you're a mom, you have a family, you go to school, for instance. The investment that you have to put into these funding applications, or even applications for supports not related to funding, often does not really consider the lived experiences of those who are actually applying for it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Hillary. Just even, it's something that I have overlooked before in terms of the process to even get to the point of being even reviewed to qualify for the end result. And then, until very recently, I did not even reflect on that process. I reflected on the how or the what, but not necessarily in the starting point of what it takes, even the accessibility component in terms of starting that process. towards
Yeah,
it.
I was just going to quickly mention that if I have to go through the process of telling the applicant funder, by the way, I can't even fill out the application because your platform is not accessible. Like it's a waste of everyone's time. The system is just kind of broken as it is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Jamila, I saw your raised hand icon.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hilary, for sharing that. I think I just want to really echo on something you mentioned, which is it's a lot of the solutions that I provided right now don't address the core problem or don't ask why does this happen? Why are these people affected the most? Or even how does this solution will continue to perpetuate the same systems that have led to this problem in the first place? And it's a big one. It's a way of systems thinking and also tracing back who is everybody that is affected across even the whole from start to finish, from when people are supported, when resources are shared with the community, etc. And I'm not even speaking about I'm not even arguing for things to be given out to people. I'm more speaking about equity in this place, because I think there's a problem here that even links to unconscious bias, whereas if the people that design a system only surround themselves with people from a certain lived experience, from a certain community, from a certain group, and maybe they're benefiting, they're enjoying everything, etc., then they'll never be exposed to what are the realities of how this affects others in that way. And so instead of, I think it's also something that I've noticed is this tendency to really hide things, like throw them under the rug or not really address them. It's the same as when we look at the history of colonization. So what I observed, even the history with residential schools as well here. You know how there's still people that come up and say, I didn't think this was happening, or even arguing that residential schools were for the better. And of course, it's for my interpretation of the events and everything. But when you have organizations that are so openly involved in genocide and the discrimination and in the changing of the landscape as it is right now, is I can expect them to do the same to others, is what I am getting to. And again, not addressing the core problem of the system itself is something that I think perpetuates the lack of true solutions.
Thanks, Jamila. Sharon.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And also, I love that, Hillary, you were speaking my language. You're talking about like human-centered design, and you're talking like I was just sitting here, be like, yes, yes, you're speaking to my soul. But more importantly, I feel like I also just want to echo what Hillary said around. I think one of the most patronizing thing that happens for entrepreneurs who are not, white, male, able-bodied, cis is this idea of the thing that we're really missing out, and honestly, not just entrepreneurs, but just in the professional world. The thing that we're really missing is mentorship. The thing we're missing is like a hand to hold. When at the end of the day, the thing we're missing is money. Like that's truly like we have been mentored out, and I mean, I appreciate like guidance and feedback as much as the next person, but the thing that we know that a lot of us in this space are missing out is adequate and consistent funding, and one that isn't just tied to our identity. So that's something important that both Jamila and Hillary said, which is this idea of like when you're not doing systems designs and you're not doing design like that sort of human-centered design, and I see this so often in my work, people tend to come to me with a solution. They say, hey, this is the organization I'm in. Can you do unconscious bias training for us? Can you do this thing? And the thing I always ask them is, what is this in service of? What is this solving? And they always struggle because they think they are solving, let's say, diversity, or they're solving like inclusion as this whole blanket, when it's like, no, let's go back and figure out what you're solving. And then when we really go back to the center, what you're trying to do is make the most privileged just comfortable, or ensure that something is done. But when you really start thinking like, okay, what is our challenge? And for instance, like you start seeing things that are not as, I don't know, like sexy, like the world is inequitable, but things like your website isn't screen reader accessible. You have a terrible parental leave policy so that people who have children, there is negative attrition once they reach a certain point. Like very just systematic and like structural challenges that you can then fix with structural solutions. And that's really similar to what is happening, I think, in this period of COVID, is a lot of the times, again, and I think that is based out of very little disaggregated data, although the federal government did say that they're, I think with the next budget or this budget, they're going to be releasing a ton of funds to pursue disaggregated data. But that's one of the things that helps us find the challenges, even in areas like COVID, where you had doctors and activists begging, please give us disaggregated data about how this pandemic has affected different communities. And that's when you see disabled folks, Black folks, immigrants, working class folks. Those are the people who are being most affected by the pandemic. But if you don't have that kind of data, what you're going to do is just throw random solutions like spaghetti to a wall, hoping something sticks. And I think worse even, you're going to start giving some really patronizing and just further reinforcing inequity by saying, oh, you know, what people need is mentorship. What these people need is, I don't know, it's sort of, I don't know if you folks have ever worked in an organization where there is an uprising and people are saying this is not good, and then the CEO comes and says, I've heard you, next week we're going to have a pizza party and really celebrate you all. It's sort of like that, right? Where it's like, no, we just need more money. I think that's similar for entrepreneurs, that's similar for COVID. Across the board, it's like, we were in crisis, and I give, especially around March, April of last year, I give a lot of leaders across industry a lot of goodwill, because we were in crisis. No one had expected this, but now we are more than a year and a half into this, and it's sort of time that we start being a little bit more strategic and intentional about how we go through problem solving and giving folks the support they need, especially like Samila said, when we're not talking about things that began yesterday, but things that are, you know, structural and historical, and we've had hundreds of years to really grapple with. And now it's really not time to, as a lot of folks love to say, listen and learn, but it's really now just time to do. We have a lot of information now, it's just time to do.
That's an awesome point. Time to do. That's awesome. So I guess I wanted to present you, because we spoke about supports that were had and not had, and how everyone felt supported and or built supports by themselves or on their own. So kind of thinking about post-pandemic, we're thinking no more COVID cases, everyone is good, everything is open, we can travel without wondering if we need to quarantine, and how everyone gets hired back, and the businesses are booming and things like that. So looking at it from a perspective of post-pandemic, and I'm saying this simply because of what we kind of spoke about or before, what are some of the supports that were provided initially? What should stay? What should go? What should be implemented? And I know that it's different because we spoke about supports meaning different things to everyone. So looking at it from an individualized perspective, from your experience, what should that look like? So perhaps, Jamila, we'll start with you, actually.
So in terms of what should be implemented, I do definitely have ideas that come to mind, but I think the first thing that will be the easiest is, can we involve the community in the solution and in the design process? And I know this is not even new. So many people say it. We've already touched on this. If there was one thing that will be, if I was like, okay, we'll take baby steps. Can we please involve the communities that are affected in the design of the solutions? And the reason I say this is because locally, based on different communities, I feel like solutions will vary. There might be little tweaks, little changes, little requests by specific communities. And so what if we were to do human-centered design, like you said, Sharon? What if we were to not standardize solutions even, and actually involve those communities affected? So that will be my main thing, if people can take one thing.
Thanks, Jamila. Sharon, I guess maybe even we'll go back to where to start. We'll go there instead of even looking at, or perhaps we can start with the solution, but where to start. I'm saying this because there's been a lot of assumptions in terms of where to start or how to disperse support. So I guess we can start there, actually. Yeah, if you're okay with that, Sharon.
Yeah, let me know if I answer your question, or if I don't answer your question here, because I think I've got it. I actually think so. You know, I'm sure my co-panelists are going to say a lot of brilliant things, have already began saying so. So there's a lot there I think that can remain, specifically for entrepreneurs. But one of the things that is sticking with me and what should definitely remain and what we need more of in a lot of the spaces that we are both participating in and the spaces that we're curating is this awareness of how to build a world in which, in crisis, people can still participate in meaningful ways, and that should be set as the norm. So, for instance, you know, the organizations now that are panic, like are forcing folks to go back to work, you know, thinking through is we've seen a world in which people can work remotely, and we've seen who this is benefiting the most. And, you know, going even at a government level, for instance, there are folks who have been in Ontario and, you know, in Canada, who have been accessing things like EI, things like disability, and have been unable to step into the workforce, A, because of the restrictions on that, and B, because like actually like the physical inaccessibility of the workplace. And it's like, okay, now we've seen things can shift. We can do things differently. We can be mindful. I mean, this is the first time in I think my life in which when I get invitations for meetings, I'm asked things like, what do I need to properly participate? You know, like these are again things that we can comfortably keep because we're understanding that, and it's not even, it can be something as simple as the fact that because we're doing work virtually, it means we're talking to people who are in different time zones. Something just as simple as considering what do you need in the way of participating so that, you know, we're not asking you to pick up a call at 9 p.m. And I think that level of empathy that came, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when we're understanding that everyone doesn't know what they're doing right now, but are trying their very best to still be in community with each other, that is something that can remain. But to some extent, that's at an individual level, but I am a systems thinker. And so to take that a little bit further, I think that's something that can be reinforced by institutions and by the government around how to ensure that everyone can participate and can have access to the spaces that provide them with a livelihood, that provide them with joy in ways that, like Hillary said, like you don't have to be begging for crumbs, you know, at one point or the other. And so I think those are the things that we haven't even seen enough of, to be honest. Like we see, this is like the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing with COVID, and we can definitely go a bit further. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Sharon. Ashley.
I don't even know how to follow that. Like, can I just say what she said? What Sharon said?
I was inspired by you, so.
Yeah, literally human-centered. Start talking and start actioning towards who you have within your systems. We've seen that it can work. And it doesn't, and we've seen how quickly it can be adapted. You know, even when we were in states of crisis, when we went into the lockdowns and shelter in places, there were so many inequities that big corporate didn't understand and didn't think through. And then there were some that, same way applied, did work. So we've seen that adapting and shifting to a flexible environment that inspires, you know, happiness rather than, you know, this concept of the 9 to 5, you know, 40-hour work week. We've seen how that inspires burnout and, you know, really a lot of people leaving the corporate workforce because of that, because, you know, there's this misguided concept of back to normal. Well, what was normal and what was so great about it? So, you know, post pandemically, we need to examine, okay, this is what worked and we've seen how it can work and, you know, what needs to be done. And I really truly believe it doesn't take mass, you know, multi-million into, you know, research and design. It takes looking at where were the successes, You know, where are the businesses and the individuals that are doing this on the daily, like Sharon's business? You know, where are the people that are doing this and are successful at it? Well, how can we adapt that? How can we look to them and say, help us, right? It's not as complex as I feel many think it is, but it's going to take work. And I think that's the problem that many heteronormative cis businesses don't want to do. They want to check the box. They don't want to do the work. So and I think that's the huge problem going into this post-pandemic is, you know, I've heard so many times, oh, we're going to get back to normal. Well, no, in my opinion, normal's gone. Let's create a new normal where people can be happy at their workplaces.
Yeah, excellent, Ashley. And even when you said that, in my mind, I'm going, there isn't just one normal. There are different normals for different people. It's not, and that even stems back into this whole, when you say, when people are talking about normal, your normal is not my normal. Will never be, the same normal. That's just the reality situation. But even kind of going back a little bit, when you were talking about in people kind of alluding to, let's go back, let's go back, let's go back. Even if we do go back to this normal, there were so many gaps in that normal to begin with. It doesn't resolve any concerns or challenges or barriers that we're already being faced with in the first place. So it's really interesting that there's this, I guess, a painted picture or canvas of what that normal was, because it does differ depending on who's speaking to that normal, essentially. So that was really awesome. Thank you.
And I believe managers and like higher ups are going to start seeing that this idea of a hierarchical corporate structure is not conducive anymore, you know, because there are going to be individuals that have seen what is possible through this pandemic of working remotely and being able to, you know, manage their time and trusting that employees are doing, you know, the work they need to be doing without having to sit at a desk for 7-8 hours a day or even 12 hours a day, and that the work is still being done, but it's being done more holistically and they're happier and more productive. That's where we need to move towards, is less of this top down, do this at the office, and more of, you know, we're all equality, like equitable, like we're all working on this together. Like the hierarchical is gone, and it needs to stay gone, because it's not conducive to anybody. We're not in that generation anymore, and nor do I think we ever should have been, but you know, I digress. So you're going to see a lot of uprising within these structures too, of people who are able to say, and individuals who are able to say, no, this doesn't work for me, and they're having the flexibility to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you made so many excellent points there, in the sense that, one, even just with that empathy that should have already been there before, that only somehow came about because of the pandemic, or maybe it hasn't come back because of the pandemic. What has been really amazing to see, to be a witness to, is parents who no longer apologize for having their children there with them when they're working, because there's no need to apologize for it. Like, that is what it's really been amazing to also see, is that there's no longer that, oh, I'm so sorry, Eva, my child is running around behind me. There's no longer that. It's just, that is my norm now, and that's something that you have to accept. And even reflecting back in the way that work has shifted, that was one of the biggest concerns even before, even looking at it from like a disability community perspective, where that was not really an option that was presented for many, having worked at Odin. And now it's being implemented as a norm or part of a hybrid solution in the way that work is being done. But on the other side, where it unfortunately ends is looking at the accessibility component of shifting into online work as well. So there's always kind of continued improvement that needs to be had when it comes to providing solutions. So yeah, that was a great point. Ashley, Jamila, I think I saw an icon, but I don't want to assume. Okay.
Yeah, I did raise my hand. So I wanted to comment because, we're focusing on entrepreneurs. I would want to say when it comes to the workplace, we have intrapreneurs as well. And then most entrepreneurs, especially if you're starting up, that also means that you have a job. And so your business, you're starting to build it after work hours. And so I just look at it from even a mental health perspective. And that's where the added barriers come in, when you're emotionally exhausted from your workplace because of whatever situation you're experiencing. And so when it comes to the supports that I find we need as entrepreneurs, there has to be that acknowledgement. We were using words like holistic, human-centered. I keep going back. Sharon, I love that. I need to talk about that with you more because I love human-centered design. But the thing is about entrepreneurs is that we build economic prosperity and we bring more jobs. We bring more options in the economy in this country. However, the society itself, just the way things are structured, they're not always so conducive for people to be intra or entrepreneurs. And I think it has to come with also a culture change because my family, they're all, they hustle. They know how to make it happen. They don't just follow step by step the system. And I see that a lot in my communities, people of color, and my Black people, Indigenous people as well. It's just something that's ingrained in our DNA as well. And so can we embrace that? Can we all bring that into the table and even acknowledge that those are skills to the workplace as well, instead of having it as a division, like, oh, I can't tell my job, I can't show this at work, I have to sort of like push this aside.
Yeah, great point, Jamila. Hillary, sorry, I just want to make sure that I haven't missed you.
I don't have anything to add, but to the points that everyone else has made. But I did just want to say that there's, Jamila, there's a pattern as to, and I know that you know this, there's a pattern to, yes, we're saying we need to engage in human-centered design, and maybe it's getting annoying for some people, but we keep on saying it because it's not happening. So start listening to the communities. We've been telling you what the solution is because we understand the problem. And maybe it's getting annoying, good, I don't care. maybe we need to make them uncomfortable, make them feel a bit annoyed until they start actually reacting and listening to the recommendations that we're at least providing to them.
Absolutely, thanks, Hillary. So I know that we're kind of essentially a little bit over time, but I wanted to present one more thing out there because we spoke a lot about kind of the resilience component, individual resilience as a person, and then there's resilience as an entrepreneur, and ensuring that you're able to really kind of push through as well. There's also that I feel as though whether we want to kind of consciously look at it or reflect on it, there's that self-accountability component that plays into it as well to ensure that the work continues. The amazing work continues, the impactful work continues. So I guess kind of thinking about that self-accountability, what was kind of that drive component, or maybe the aha moment where you're realizing, Sharon, you spoke about it, is that we didn't become incorporated until a certain time, and Ashley, you alluded to this as well. What was kind of that self-accountability piece to really push towards and continue to push towards that path of success? And why is it important to have within an entrepreneur as well? So Ashley, we'll start with you.
As an Indigenous woman, I'm always thinking, and I know I'm not the only one, I'm always thinking of 7 generations ahead. So I think that's the biggest piece for me is, what am I doing now for my kids and for the next 7 generations? Do I want them in a society that is based like today? Absolutely not. My kids, I already fear for my kids. They're 5 and 8, they're mixed race boys. And I'm already faced with the reality of, okay, so at what point do my kids become a threat? And that's compounded with, the Indigenous lens of, okay, we're still dealing and unpacking the trauma of residential school and the intergenerational trauma and blood memory that we carry. So there's all these, intersectional pieces that we have to look at. And for myself, I want my kids to be strong and resilient. But on the other hand, in some cases, I'm tired of being resilient. So being honest with myself is a huge accountability factor of knowing when I need to say when I'm advocating or, co-creating change with other meaningful businesses and colleagues, when I need to step back and say, I can't do this for you, especially to my non-Indigenous and non-BIPOC individuals and businesses, is I'm not going to do the work for you. I'm one person. This is my lived experience. This is, start listening to the community that you want to co-create change with, and start doing the actions that we're suggesting. I mean, as an Indigenous woman, we've got 94 call to actions in the Truth and Reconciliation. Where is that? Where are the businesses adopting UNDRIP? Those are the pieces that we've screamed for generations what is needed, and it's time to put those to change. And there are so many amazing Indigenous women and women in general, entrepreneurs, that are doing this, and it's time to start actioning it and stop putting all of this emotional labor onto those who have this experience and these lived experiences, because we are exhausted.
Thank you, Ashley. Hillary.
I feel like we could have just had like one uni panel, because we're all saying very similar things, which is amazing. We're all on the same page. I think we're ready for the revolution. I just wanted to start off by saying I saw this quote on Twitter a number of years ago. I apologize to the individual. I'm not sure who it was. I totally just read it, and then it pops up in my mind every once in a while. And it's this question: do you have resilience or do you have privilege? And I think that you can definitely have both. But people often say it's amazing that you've been able to do all of this stuff. Like I did my undergrad, my master's. I'm very proud of that, but it's because I have the ability and the supports to do that. Not simply being smart or able to do something doesn't ensure that you're actually going to do that. So just wanted to note that, like, self-accountability, also privilege just plays a huge part in all of that. My kind of personal definition of self-accountability, I really had to kind of think about this one. This was a good reflection exercise for me. I really wrap my identity in my business. My business is part of who I am to some extent, and vice versa. So when this is the case, you really need to set strict boundaries between yourself and your business, and also what your business is meant to put out into the world, and what perception do you want people to be taking of you and your business as you're operating in society. So for me, what does this look like? For one, it's just definitely owning all of your decisions, both good and bad. I think of accountability in terms of responsibility a lot of the time. So definitely taking responsibility for all of your actions. And so certainly we often punish ourselves when we do something wrong as a business owner, but we rarely reward ourselves for those smaller wins, or even those bigger wins. Like, I was speaking with a coach yesterday, and I mentioned very casually, oh, a purchase order just came in. And because when you're working in your business, it can just feel like you're almost, you can't see things that are happening. They just pass you by. She was like, hold on a minute. Like, that deserves some celebration. That's like like what you need right now is sales. So if you just got a purchase order, that's excellent. Like, take a moment and celebrate that. So I definitely believe that is part of it. But another is also just making sure that you're able to understand when enough is enough. And we have a finite amount of energy in the day and a finite amount of hours. And it's really easy, again, when it's something that's tied to your identity, to want to and feel that you are obligated to invest all of your time and energy to creating that success and to creating impact in your community. And that is not sustainable in any sense of the term. So being able to recognize and hold yourself accountable for when you need to take a step back, listening to yourself, trusting your gut. I learned that back in late April when before a meeting, I told myself, I'm feeling burnt out. And then I went into the meeting and burst into tears. I'm like, yeah, oh, yeah, your gut is telling you something, listen to it. So just being able to reflect on your experiences and understand what your needs are in relation to the business and vice versa. Trying to balance that as much as possible. And also, again, just trying to maintain what perceptions you want to put out into the world. We all need to be accountable to that. We could easily just go the direction of maintaining the system. But in order to do differently, we need to hold ourselves accountable again and really take action and intentional steps to reverse those inequalities. So being intentional about different types of paid leaves, for instance, providing transport to your work, for instance, if you need people to be in a workspace, providing different types of benefits and supports and development opportunities to your employees, and just really making sure that you're overtly on the right side of issues. Often it's the pattern of businesses to be neutral or to just go along with what wherever the market's going, wherever it's trending in terms of social issues. And I've said, for instance, I want to be unapologetically feminist in my business. I don't want to be anything other than on the right side of issues and on the right side of history. And so often that's been a taboo within business to not get involved with that. But it's our responsibility, I think, to change the system if we have, again, the energy.
Absolutely. So many wonderful points, Hillary, that you made. Thank you so much. Ashley, I believe we lost him a little bit. Ashley? Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to pop out for a second. Which question are we tackling?
All good. Just in terms of self-accountability, what I had talked about earlier in terms of your pathways, which you'd already kind of mentioned, but is there anything else that you'd like to add? I know that I just wanted to, or Sharon, anything you'd like to add to self-accountability component?
I think I already touched on it a bit, so I'll pass off to Sharon.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sharon.
Thank you. I'll keep it nice and tight because, as Hillary said, we're prepping for the revolution and we need to get our shoes on and stuff. So I think in terms of everything that you mentioned, the first thing I want to just mention is, like, as a brand, personally, my brand is not resilience. I'm not a resilient person. A lot of what I do has been based on survival, including entrepreneurship. Like in the last, I'd say, decade, like there's been a really like sexy spin on entrepreneurship, but for as long as I've known it, in childhood, I think one of the first entrepreneurs I knew when I came to Kenya was I think she was Congolese woman who braided my hair in her basement. So like that's the entrepreneurship that I'm most familiar with. Like it's for survival, it's out of necessity. So I don't think I'm resilient or really special in any particular way. I think I am going by my ancestral nature to, do what is needed to survive. And like Ashley said, to create a space that isn't going to be detrimental to those who come after me. And I think that's also really interesting as a person who has no children and who isn't planning to have children, to start conceptualizing, like, what does it mean to I think it's again, Miriam Kaba talked about that practice of hope. It's a beautiful practice of hope to try and create a future for generations that are not of your own blood, because it's truly saying that like the value of those people isn't that they're related to me by blood, but just that they get to share the space. In terms of accountability, the two things that come to me top of mind is being very transparent with community about how I run my business, about how we do what we do, about how we make the decisions we make, about the things that we don't do great, right? And I think that's a really big part of how I want to continue this work. And the other one is holding myself accountable and asking the people around me to hold me accountable around scaling with intentionality. I think when you enter the entrepreneurship space, you just also enter a very like hyper capitalist and hyper competitive and hyper like success space, where it's like what success is tied to like the dollars and cents in your bank account and how big you are and how much you're doing and how many clients you have. And I'm just trying to be intentional about how we're doing what we're doing. A lot like, you know, like Hillary said, like I do not want to cry at meetings, so I would rather just have my needs met financially, do the work well, but maybe I'm not, you know, like Ashley said, I'm not trying to compete with KPMG. I know that my work is exceptionally better than theirs, but also doesn't mean that I have to be multi-million-dollar. Like I'm okay with that. And even just the implications that it comes with being so big and to monopolize a space, like there is an ethical question there. And that's why I think it's really important for me in terms of transparency to scale with intentionality. And that's all I got.
No, that's a great point, Sharon, because I do think that the mission and the vision that you instill at the very beginning, it's very important to kind of reflect on that to see, I guess, what you're doing. Is it in reflection of that mission and vision that you originally started with, and talking about that when we are scaling, what is the intention behind that? So that was a great point. Thanks, Sharon. Jamila, yes, sorry, I just want to make sure that I don't miss you in this.
Yeah, awesome. Sharon, again, thank you so much for sharing that piece of transparency. I think it's so important. I will share a story to close with this one, but I used to be really proud of calling myself resilient. I will celebrate my ancestry, the fact that we made it this far, the fact that I still am and I keep creating and growing. But then I started questioning, why do I even have to add resilience as one of the things I'm proud of? Like, why do I have to, uphold this image of a strong, let's say, a strong woman or a resilient entrepreneur against all odds, etc. And so I think that goes back to systemically, why do these things are in place and why do we even celebrate this? Sort of as if I found myself celebrating my own resilience and, accepting the fact that there were those barriers that would be additional barriers that other people wouldn't have to address or face as an entrepreneur. And so I am resilient. I celebrate resilience, but I celebrate it because resilience, I look at it a bit different of, have I been able to maintain my culture and my values throughout this whole journey? And I think it really goes back to values. How have I changed? Have I allowed this to change me in a way that is beneficial to my communities? That is what I consider more resilience in this case, where it's not just, surviving and doing well, regardless of everything that happens around you, but am I still maintaining that accountability to my communities, to the people that I care for and that care for me as well?
Yeah, that's so amazing. I can't believe it's been over an hour. I feel this is something that we can continue to kind of talk to and converse about, but I am just very grateful to virtually sit here and hopefully one day physically be able to sit across each and every one of you and have an awesome conversation and continue to talk about our strength and our experiences in the work that we're continuing doing in social impact and social enterprise. So I want to really thank each and every one of you for saying yes to this conversation, which I think it's incredibly important to have, and it's very timely, I find, to talk about this, and to hopefully anyone who clicks on this conversation, other entrepreneurs to really learn from, and those who aren't entrepreneurs to learn from in other ways when it comes to action and accountability as well. So thank you so much for joining this afternoon. And I cannot wait to hear about where it takes. I can't wait to kind of essentially connect with all of you 2022 and hear about your accomplishments and your social impact in the community. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.